Good evening. My name is Michael Reyes. I am 47 years old, and I live in a small town tucked into a mountain range called Blackridge in northern New Mexico. Our town sits in a hollow, ringed by ridges and dense brush, and for as long as I can remember, there has been a kind of hush that falls over the streets when the sun goes down. I worked nights at the gas station for years, and most people around here know me as someone who closes late and walks home in the dark. My mother, Rosa, always worried about my schedule. The night everything changed, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said, with that same tired look she always had, "My son, please do not come home late tonight." I laughed, like you do when a parent worries too much, and I told her I would be fine. It was nearly midnight when I turned the key in the station door and started the walk up the narrow road toward my trailer. The air smelled of cold dust and crushed sage, and the road glinted under the light of a full moon. I had a presentiment I could not name, a small weight at the base of my skull that made me glance over my shoulder twice in a single block. Then, when I reached the porch and fumbled with the lock, I felt that impossible shift in the world, like a note suddenly out of tune. A shape stood at the foot of my steps, tall enough to reach my shoulder and small enough to stand on its hind legs. It looked like a person until it turned its head, and I saw eyes that belonged to someone I knew, human and clear, and staring at me. I have told this in pieces to friends and to a sheriff, and I am telling it now so that anyone who hears might understand the kind of silence that follows a night like that. If you keep listening, I will tell you every detail and why I do not walk that road alone anymore. I grew up 2 valleys over, the son of a ranch hand and a seamstress, and I learned early that the mountain takes what it wants if you do not pay attention. As a boy, I rode a bicycle along the faint trails, following cow paths and listening to older men trade stories about things that crept out of the brush at night. I left for a while to work on a ranch near Santa Fe, and then came back after my wife Leela died in a car crash on a rainy highway. Losing her changed how I noticed the world. I started paying attention to small sounds, to fill empty spaces, to the rasp of a fence wire, and the way a porch light hummed when wind moved the trees. Those habits kept me alive on long nights alone behind the counter at the gas station. After Leela died, I kept a pocket Bible in the drawer, and I called my mother every week. I was not a man who chased legends. I fixed pickup trucks and pumped gas, and knew the names of every dog in town. Yet in the months before that night, neighbors began to talk differently. Abel Carver, who works as a watchman at the quarry, said he heard unnatural breathing at the gate. Sheriff Tom Hargrove mentioned shredded fabric on the road near the old crossroads. Luis Ortega, the mechanic, said his horse bolted for no reason at dawn. Those things are small, but together they make a pattern you feel in your chest. I had no idea that pattern would thread through my door. The night at my porch began like any other, but then the world tightened. I remember the sound of my own boots on the wooden steps, the metal key cool and slightly damp in my palm, the porch light throwing a pale circle on the weathered boards. I remember the smell of smoke from a distant bonfire and the metallic tang of oil from the station truck I had washed earlier. I remember the weight behind my eyes, the hair along the back of my neck standing up as if someone had whispered into it. I said, "Who's there?" and the thing at my door tilted its head. It had a body shaped like a person, but not quite right, a slight hump along its spine, and shoulders too long for its frame. It made no sound at first. Then a voice that was a cracked imitation of a neighbor, Michael, came from its mouth. I recognized the cadence that belonged to Father Miguel, who sometimes prayed at funerals, and for a moment my knees got very soft. The creature stepped forward, and the moon caught in its eyes. They were human eyes, the exact color of my sister-in-law Nora Webb, soft and reflective, and full of a terrible patience. I stepped back, and the porch board squealed. The creature raised a hand, and the fingers twitched like a puppet's. I asked, "What do you want?" And it answered, "I want in." I felt my chest collapse into a small cave of fear, and then I laughed aloud, a stupid laugh meant to hide a shaking. The dialogue drifted between me and that shape like two people testing whether a conversation could stand in place of violence. I will record here every exchange because each line pulled me deeper into disbelief, and each reply made me understand something older than logic. I said, "You are not my neighbor," and it said, "I am what you left at the crossroads," using a voice that was my own when I swore at the repair on the station pump. I said, "Who are you?" and it said, "Only your name," and then someone else's name, and then a quiet list of places it had watched. The porch light seemed suddenly too small. I tasted copper and fear in my mouth, and the wood smelled faintly of varnish and mothballs, the air itself thick with the scent of animal wet fur. I pushed the door open and tried to step inside, and it moved as if the air had weight. My hands found the doorknob, and I heard a soft scraping, like claws over concrete. My palms were slick. I said to it, "Get away from my door," and it said, "You left the path open." That stupid phrase later echoed like a lock in my mind. In the conversation, I tried bargaining like a man bargaining with a delivery he did not want. I said, "If you are someone in town, play a trick and walk away now." It looked up at me with those human eyes and said, "I walked through your dreams so you would open." At that point, I could not tell if I was arguing with a living person or with some stitch in the world where other things slip through. I reached for the old shotgun I kept behind the door, and for a breath the creature did not move. Then it turned its head slowly, as if to listen for something beyond the porch, and I saw nostrils flare like a hound sniffing the dark. I counted 7 breaths before I hit the light switch, and the bulb burned with a small electric sound that seemed much too loud. The creature flinched and moved back a step, and the porch board creaked under its weight. The conversation repeated in variants 7 or 8 times, each exchange increasing the sense of wrongness until I fumbled with the gun and realized my hands could not steady. At a certain point, the only sensible thing left was to force a final question. I said, "What are you?" And it smiled with a mouth that held no teeth at first and then revealed short, blunt fangs. And it said in a voice that was not quite human but carried human memory, "I am everything you throw away at night." The sound of that made me hot and cold at once. A long neighbor's pickup truck rolled slow past the yard on the gravel road, and the creature looked toward the sound with a hungry deliberation. That was when I slammed the door shut and latched it with a trembling hand. I did not stay inside alone. I pounded on Daniel Mercer's apartment 2 doors down, and he answered in pajamas with a cigarette hanging from his lip. We talked outside on the stoop with the light from a bare bulb spilling over us and the mountain breathing behind. Daniel is a mechanic's son with wide hands who does not scare easily. I told him exactly what I had seen, and he at first said, "You are losing sleep." Then he looked past me toward the dark and asked, "Did it have eyes like people?" I said yes, and he went pale and told me to call Sheriff Tom. We had a back and forth of voices that stretched a long time. Daniel said, "Maybe it's a lost man." I said, "He had presences around him, like he's been worn." Daniel asked, "Did it speak your name?" I said yes, and he swallowed and asked, "Was it wearing our mother's clothes?" I said no. It wore nothing like clothes, just skin that shifted when it breathed. Daniel said, "We should get Marta Lopez and see if she remembers something about the old family down the hill." Marta, who runs the community radio, came with a thermos of coffee and sat on my porch step, listening as if we were discussing the weather. Marta said, into the dark, as if addressing a neighbor, "Whoever you are, leave him alone." And the creature answered soft words that matched an old lullaby my sister used to sing. The exchange went on until dawn, with a string of 7 to 9 short back and forths, as if the thing wanted to negotiate a place, then pressed at the edges until it decided it was not time. The sensory details are burned into me, the way cold leaves a mark, the bite of the night air, the metallic smell when it drew breath, The scrape of its nails against wood, the damp warmth of Daniel's palm on my shoulder as he steadied me, the taste of coffee that would not calm my teeth. After the first night, I found shelter in Marta's small studio above the radio shed, and from there we watched the road and the neighborhood in shifts. She called in Nora Webb and Luis Ortega, and a small group gathered who knew how to wait without making it worse. Nora is a nurse at the clinic and had a calm voice that cut through the tension like sunlight. Luis Ortega brought the old pickup and a suitcase of tools, as if getting ready for a long trip. We spent hours trading memories. Grandma Esmeralda, who lives on the far side of the valley, told us stories at the back of Marta's chair about a humped-back figure that used to stand near the encrucijada between the two country roads. Abel the watchman swore he had seen the same figure half a mile from the quarry gate at dawn, and that his dog had not only fled but returned with a limp. Sheriff Tom came by with notebook in hand, and his presence gave the group permission to speak in ordinary voices. He took statements from Marta, Daniel, Luis, Nora, and Abel. Each person described small overlapping threads, a scent like old leather, a shadow that did not match any body, and a kind of patient waiting. We all found ourselves naming things to make the fear smaller. I heard quotes that would later find their way into reports. Marta said, "It is like the night wears a face when it wants to be seen." Daniel said, "It looked at me like it was reading the names on my bones." Nora said, "I do not believe in monsters, but I feel the weight of something." Luis said, "Whatever it is, it understands the roads." The town, which had been sleepy and used to the occasional oddity, began to exchange looks that meant the same thing no one wanted to say aloud: "We are not alone here at night." We tried rituals that are more practical than mystical. Sheriff Tom called the regional station and logged the incident as a possible trespass and public disturbance. The report asked for any physical evidence. Marta recorded an audio tape of the night, and we played it slow and fast, and still we could not be sure what we heard beyond the porch light switch and the creak of the boards. The medical clinic documented a case note when I went in the next day to say my hands did not stop trembling. Nora wrote about stress response and the smell of burnt hair in the station truck that morning. The technical description of procedures was brief but necessary. The sheriff documented the scene in a standard perimeter sketch, took photographs of the porch with scale markers, collected hair samples found snagged on the railing, which were sent to the county lab, and logged witness statements into the evidence file for chain of custody. The lab results were inconclusive at first and later returned as degraded keratin consistent with multiple mammalian sources, which complicated interpretation. That small professional arc made the story have a seriousness that the town had lacked. As people listened, a pattern of legend began to overlay the facts. Grandma Esmeralda and Father Miguel offered interpretations rooted in older codes of the valley. They recalled a tale about a figure that would stand at doorways on nights when the moon hung full and people carried their grief too close to the skin. This connection to old lore made others speak. Father Miguel said, "In my parish there were always stories of a lost man who took a shape when his name was forgotten, and he spoke of names people did not use anymore, names of those buried unmarked." Marta anchored her radio segment with interviews. She called Estela Ramirez, who runs the auberge down by the lower trail, and Estela said she had seen a shadow cross the road that smelled of wet wool. Marta also talked to Abel Carver, who insisted he had a photograph of a hunched outline beyond the quarry fence. Luis Ortega, the mechanic, added that he had fixed a truck that morning which had scratches along the tailgate that could not be explained by rock or brush. Names kept coming. Dr. Peter Hale from the regional hospital was asked to review the hair samples, and he agreed they were not from a single species, and Nurse Nora Webb vouched for the fact that several townsfolk had come to the clinic with panic symptoms after midnight. Each testimony did not prove anything on its own, but together they formed a communal ledger of fear and curiosity. The way the story wove into the town's memory was the same way a vine finds a fence, slow and inevitable. The confrontation came on a night when the moon was low and the air had that greenish hush you feel before a summer storm. We organized in a way that felt like preparing for a long, cold wait. Daniel, Marta, Nora, Luis, Abel, and I took shifts on porches and at corners. We placed lanterns we could move and kept a radio playing to make the night feel less open. At around 2 a.m., the animal sense returned, a pressure that moved along the road like a footfall you felt through the soles of your boots. I will record 3 moments of acute tension that remain vivid. The first moment occurred when the creature stepped onto the road under the willow and the lantern light made its skin shine like old glass. For about 550 characters, I remember the click of a bone in my throat and the way the night pressed against our ears. The smell of damp earth rising, a distant dog howling, the creature pausing exactly at the line where light and dark met, and then bending to look directly at Marta as if she were the only person in the world who could answer a question it had been trying to ask. The second tense moment came when Sheriff Tom and I tried to move toward it with a flashlight, and the thing turned and ran with an impossible full sprint for its length, then stopped on all fours to sniff the air like a coyote before standing again and meeting our eyes. For roughly 570 characters, the world narrowed, the sound of wheels in the distance turned into a drum, my breath came sharp, and the creature let out a low sound that was almost a name. The third moment was a desperate instant when it pressed against a fence and leapt toward a small child's shadow across the road, and we all shouted, and the child's mother clapped her hands, and the creature recoiled and vanished into the brush, leaving a line of stepped-over dust that settled as if nothing had moved. That final moment lasted about 520 characters in my memory, a compressed time like a film strip stopping. During the confrontation, the dialogues were long and ragged. Sheriff Tom said, "Do not approach," and I said, "It is at the lower fence," and he said, "Get everyone inside now," and Marta said, "I will call the neighbors," and Luis yelled, "Grab the lanterns," and Abel said, "My dog will not get near that thing," and Nora said, "The child is fine, bring the little ones in." Those exchanges repeated 7 to 9 times between different pairs until the creature chose its own exit. We coordinated like people who have practiced a drill and yet had never been tested like that. In the minutes that followed, we combed the edge of the brush and found nothing but broken twigs and a smear of something dark on a rock that had not been there before. The town's reactions were immediate. Parents brought children inside earlier than they had in years. People who had once sat on porches until 3 in the morning started retreating to rooms with locks. Sheriff Tom began a nightly patrol schedule and asked for volunteers. Marta organized a list over the radio of people willing to check on the elderly. The practical consequences were small steps that changed rhythms. My father came with his old truck and offered to take me to work in the mornings. Daniel began leaving his shop light on all night. Luis fitted motion sensor lights to the gas station, and Nora set up a sign-up sheet at the clinic for anyone who felt their sleep breaking with fear. The immediate aftermath felt like a low-grade alarm. The town did not panic into chaos, but it did rearrange itself. People who had been casual about walking at night now grouped their trips. Father Miguel held a small blessing at the edge of town and put matches in a little bowl along the road for those who wanted to hold light as they walked. Sheriff Tom logged more calls, and Dr. Peter Hale asked for more detailed samples to send to the university lab. We received a preliminary email that described the hair samples as heterogeneous and recommended further testing. The technical lane of investigation continued in a sober tone. The county lab performed a partial DNA run and found fragments that matched multiple mammals but no full profile. The documentation was 300 characters of careful notes showing chain of custody and the lab's cautious language about inconclusive results and the need for more sampling. That procedural description made some people feel safer because it meant something official was involved. For others, the lack of a tidy answer made the fear wider. The community response involved names and actions. Marta led a neighborhood watch with a roster that included Daniel, Luis, Nora, Abel, and a newcomer named Estela Ramirez who had moved here 2 years earlier. Sheriff Tom increased the number of patrols and coordinated with nearby towns. Father Miguel organized a listening circle at the church where people could speak about what they had seen and feel heard. Rosa, my mother, who had warned me to stay home, began sleeping with a light on near her bed, and she walked the short distance to my trailer at dusk to make sure the door was locked. The social ledger recorded small acts. Luis taking the long route to work. To avoid a certain trail, Daniel bringing extra sandwiches to share with anyone on night shift. Nora volunteering at the clinic on extra nights to check for panic-related symptoms. The moral we all voiced between clenched teeth was simple and blunt. I said on record, do not dismiss what your skin tells you. And Marta said on air, if you feel watched, do not walk alone. That became the practical warning we left hanging in conversations. Some suggested more extreme measures, a fence along the lowest road, lights in the trees, a formal investigation by the university. Others, like Abel, suggested less, saying we should let the thing be if it wanted to be left alone. The town shows a middle path, more neighbors checking on one another, and an understanding that our habits had to change. 1 month later, the town moved into a routine that held its edges together but did not forget. At that point, people were still talking about the creature, and some nights the roads felt empty for the first time in decades. I kept a small recorder on my nightstand, and I listened back to the porch recording to hear my own voice and the quiet between words. The community watch that Marta organized had a schedule and showed up for 3 nights a week. Sheriff Tom reported that there were fewer sightings, but that he received calls about odd noises, and that a farmer to the east found a gate down and a trail of flattened brush leading into the ravine. Rosa came to my trailer twice a week with Stu, and we sat on her small couch and spoke softly about groceries and the weather and what it meant to keep house in a town that now dressed its nights in caution. The radio station ran a segment of compiled testimonies, and the comments were both skeptical and supportive. Some offered strange theories, and others wrote messages of solidarity. Life felt reorganized but steady, like a drawer you have relined to fit a new item. I avoided the lower trail, and for the first time in a long while, I said yes when someone offered a ride. There were times when I felt foolish, when I would go outside to smoke and find nothing but the wide open sky and tell myself I had imagined it all. Those moments were honest and small and made the longer ones more bearable. 3 months after that night, the town had documented a handful of incidents scattered across the valley, and the university sent a grad student team to interview witnesses and collect environmental samples. Dr. Peter Hale from the hospital met with the team and agreed to catalog the health-related impacts of chronic fear. They found traces of animal hair in 3 more places and a pattern of disturbed nests, but still no conclusive DNA that tied the events to a known species. The young researchers were polite and careful. Marta, they recorded their interviews and played a portion over the radio with a disclaimer that the investigation was ongoing. Estela Ramirez reported a sighting near the old stone bridge, and the grad students took soil samples and then drove away anxious to run tests. The town had grown used to the researchers' presence and to the slow bureaucratic rituals of evidence gathering. I started going to community meetings, and we assembled a pamphlet of things to do if someone encountered the creature, including staying in lit areas, calling the sheriff, and not confronting it alone. The pamphlet was printed at the print shop with Luis Ortega's business card on the back. The pamphlet gave a shape to our fear and turned an amorphous dread into a list you could keep in your pocket. 6 months later, the valley felt different in a way that was hard to explain in short phrases. The initial shock had thinned but not gone.
People still told the story at the diner, and the radio ran a retrospective on the series of events, complete with snippets from Sheriff Tom Marta and Dr. Hale. The grad students had published preliminary findings that spoke about mixed organic samples and possible explanations ranging from stray animals adopting human observable patterns to a more complex pathology of social memory. The lab results offered no comfort for those who had seen human eyes where they did not belong. In private conversations, names that had been whispered now had faces and small objects attached to them. Nora had a friend who refused to sleep alone. Daniel had fitted extra locks on his shop, and Abel sold motion sensors to neighbors. Estella started a neighborhood texting chain that made the nights feel less solitary. I returned to the gas station in daylight and sat behind the counter with a thermos of coffee and a flashlight within reach. I still do not walk the lower road alone, and there are nights when I hear a sound outside and my heart launches and then settles when it is only a pickup. My mother visits, and she sits on the porch and watches the hill across the valley and says nothing. Father Miguel held another blessing and read names we had forgotten for longer than I could say. The town learned to treat the possibility of the unknown as something to act around, not something to burn. We did not exercise the valley, but we learned to lock our doors and watch the lanes together. If you are feeling that same chill I felt when you heard about the eyes at my door, know that your reaction is part of a shared human pattern. Stories like this stir a memory older than news feeds and connect us back to how communities used to guard one another. If you have a story like this, please write it in the comments, starting the first word with night, and tell us where you are from. Your testimonies build a map that helps others know where to be careful and what patterns to watch for. Every single comment matters because it turns isolated fear into a communal ledger we can learn from. Your memories could be the clue that helps someone else not repeat a mistake. For now, if you want to help, tell your story and add the region so others can trace similar threads. We will read them, and, if there is enough, we will follow up and share what we find. That is how we keep the valley from holding its secrets too long. In the end, I learned a practical lesson and a moral one. The practical lesson is simple. If you hear something at your door at midnight, do not assume it is a neighbor. Bring a light, call someone, keep children inside. The moral lesson is older and harder, and it was told to me in small ways by people who share a quiet courage. We learned to listen to a mother's warning and to trust the small signals the world gives. The town reorganized itself around care. My routine changed. I no longer walk alone at night, and I let others know where I will be. We all traded a little independence for a measure of safety, and for the quiet knowledge that we watch and are watched. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Do not ignore the look in someone's eyes at your door, even if that look belongs to someone you recognize. Good night, and be careful when the moon is full and the road seems too empty. If you are moved by this story, please subscribe for more first-hand accounts and follow-ups from towns like ours who have learned to listen to the night.